Everything Saber does right in Evil Dead the game. This is a video that I felt compelled to make really for two reasons. Number one, on some of my last videos, especially when it got like cross-posted on Reddit, I see a bunch of people who complain and are like, man, does this guy even like the game? All he does is complain about it. And I thought that was interesting because the truth is that most of the time, it to someone who doesn't really watch my videos very often or doesn't watch all of them, I can see why somebody would feel that way, because most of the time it's me saying I talking about the stuff that I don't agree with, because there's more discourse over something that I don't agree with. Whereas if it's something I do agree with, it's usually just me being like, that's a good change, I like that, and that's the end of the discussion. Like, there's not too much to talk about when it's something that I like. There's more to talk about when it's like, I dislike this, and here's all the reasons why this doesn't work, and so on and so forth. So I felt it necessary to make a video where I say, hey, Saber, I like your game. I really do. I like Evil Dead. I don't get to play it as much as I wish I could anymore. I played the heck out of it when it first came out. I've been very busy with like wrestling and other stuff recently, and God of War Ragnarok just came out, and I've been busy playing that. But it's a fantastic game. I love Evil Dead the game, and there's a lot of things that this game does right, and a lot of things the devs of this game do well. And the second reason I wanted to make this video is because just recently we had prestige rewards come out. And that was kind of the inspiration for a video like this. And I actually was planning on making this video. I wrote like down all my ideas and stuff before they even announced the prestige system. I know they've been talking about it for a while, but we didn't know like exactly when it was coming. And this just further incentivized me to make a video, because the prestige system truly is the byproduct of community feedback. And it's a great example of how the devs of this game truly listen to the community. And that's reason number one, the first thing that Saber does that is fantastic. This dev team, for better or worse, really does listen to the community more so than maybe any dev team I've ever experienced in any other asymmetrical game. This dev team is fantastic at listening to players. Now, some people may not like, the reason I say for better or for worse is because the community is so divided on what is the right thing to do, that, oftentimes they'll do something and, someone like me will say, I didn't like that, I thought it was a bad decision. And other people will say it was great, and vice versa. But there's no doubt that they do listen to the community. And this prestige system is a perfect example of this. I truly believe the prestige system would not exist. It would not be in this game if it weren't for community feedback, and if it weren't for the developers of this game listening to that community feedback. This is something that the community requested, and they put it in the game because of that. And listening to the community is so important too. This is the other thing that I thought was important to talk about, because you cannot go just based on data when it comes to like balancing your game and stuff like that, because data doesn't tell the full story. You need context to things. A perfect example that I like to give is the nurse in Dead by Daylight. If you've ever played Dead by Daylight, then you know Nurse has been, since she first entered the game and still is to this day, the strongest killer in the game by a significant margin. But if you look at Dead by Daylight's data, if you look at the kill rates of the killers in Dead by Daylight, Nurse looks like she's the worst killer in the game, because her kill rates are the worst. She has like a 43% kill rate or something like that, which is the worst in the game by far. So if you just look at the data, you might think, well, Nurse needs a buff. She doesn't get as many kills as the rest of the killers do. But if you use context, then you know that the reason that is because despite being the strongest killer by far, she is also the most difficult to play. And that's why her kill rates are so low, because when people first start playing Nurse, lots of people escape on them, because it's really hard to learn her when you're first starting out with her, and it skews the numbers. So you have to use a balance of community feedback and your own data. And I think that the devs of this game do a really good job of that. They do an excellent job of that. And you know, Dead by Daylight is a game where we asked for. I should preface this by saying, when they released the prestige rewards here, people complained, this is way too grindy. This is ridiculous. This is going to take ages. People with millions and millions of points saved up, spirit points saved up, could barely progress even like one challenge. It was absurd. So what, 3 or 4 days later, they come out with a new patch that gives you double the spirit points for each match and 30% more spirit points each time you level up. So it lessens the grind. Now, is it enough? No, it probably isn't. There will probably be more added in the future. It'll probably be made even less grindy. Like if you look right at these challenges on my screen here, they're still really absurd. They're still way too much, but they still listened. I mean, in the span of just a few days of the prestige patch, they listened to the community and at least did something. Sure, maybe it wasn't enough yet, but they did something. Compare that to Dead by Daylight, where we complained in that game that the grind was too much for years. It took them something like 6 to 7 years to finally introduce a patch that lessened the grind of Dead by Daylight. That's absurd. And in general, I remember the frustration coming over from Dead by Daylight that so often the community would say, hey, this thing is a problem, and the devs would not do anything about it because they would give some vague response about how we have data, trust us, that tells us that you guys are wrong. So this dev team does an amazing job of listening to the community. Maybe they don't always, you know, make the right decisions on that, but that's part of it. That's just what's going to happen when you listen to the community. Because, you know, sometimes there could be like a vocal minority. Maybe there's a bunch of dumb survivors who, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of people think I'm dumb who are like, oh, this thing's broken or this thing's not strong enough. And then they change it. And it's like, oh, it turns out that was a bad change. And vice versa. There could be demons who act the same way. But I really do appreciate that they listen to the community, because I would much rather them listen to the community and make a few mistakes along the way than just ignore them completely and just be like, nope, we know what we're doing. The community doesn't. We're going to do our own thing. I'm grateful for Saber listening to the community. That's awesome. And that's really the main reason I think that Saber has done a great job on this game so far. For gameplay, I'll start with gameplay and then kind of, you know, bounce back and forth between other things. I got a bunch of stuff written down here. Hitting enemies in this game is very satisfying. I just got done playing God of War Ragnarok. Yeah, the same thing in that game. That game, you know, is a AAA title, very popular. There's a reason that it wins a ton of awards, that the last one did, I should say, and that this one will as well. And a big reason for that that's often overlooked is that it really does feel satisfying to hit enemies, and that's the same case in Evil Dead. Like, every time you hit something, it feels like it has an impact. You see blood flying everywhere. You see, you know, enemies getting limbs chopped off and things like that. And it feels really good. And I can't tell you how underrated that is. Like, it's something you probably don't really appreciate, but I've played games where hitting something or shooting something doesn't feel satisfying, and it matters a lot. It's something you don't really notice when it's good and it's there, but you really do notice when it's bad and it's not there. And that's something that I really appreciate about this game. It's satisfying, and most importantly, it's true to Evil Dead. It's very over the top, gory, violent, and it's awesome. It's one of the best things about gameplay. I love the clever way that they implemented the iconic sort of fisheye view from the demon perspective into gameplay. And in general, just the way they managed to make franchise staples like possessing things into actual gameplay mechanics. That's so cool. Now, you could say that, like in my opinion, I just don't find demon gameplay that fun, just on a personal level. But their ability to actually like tie in iconic things from the Evil Dead franchise into actual gameplay mechanics is really sick. Like, it was really creative to be like, we're not just gonna have the demon side just play a character like they do in every other asymmetrical game. We're gonna have them actually be in that like demon vision mode and fly around the map just like first person, just like they do in the movies, and possess things. And that is an incredible. Even if you don't like that system, you cannot deny that it is incredibly creative and really cool that they were able to implement that. Kind of piggybacking off my first thing is that finishers are creative. Again, very violent and true to Evil Dead. Very well done. There's lots of stuff in it that is even kind of funny. Like, I think the recent staff weapon that just got put in the game, there's like a nut shot a maneuver there. So there's lots of cool stuff. In regards to the animation, say there's a good mixture of stuff that's just really brutal that fits with Evil Dead, stuff that's really funny that fits with Evil Dead. It's a great mix of different things, and they're all very creative. Like, there's no animations that really make you say like, oh, well, that was kind of lame. Like, all of them are brutal and involve somebody just getting decapitated or having a limb chopped off or something, and that's awesome. On that note, it doesn't shy away from over-the-top gore. Just same thing that Friday the 13th did. Friday the 13th, the game did an excellent job of making sure that Jason's kill animations were just as brutal as they are in his films, and they do that here in Evil Dead, and that's something that I think is an improvement from Dead by Daylight, because Dead by Daylight is something where it feels like, there's still blood and violence and stuff in Dead by Daylight, but it's certainly like watered down. You have to admit, like, it's not as brutal as it could be. Like, you're not really typically seeing people like getting their heads ripped off or something really over the top like that. For the most part, the violence is fairly tame in Dead by Daylight. This game doesn't pull any punches. You're seeing people get exploded, limbs are flying. It's great. That's a weird sentence out of context. There's a ton of variety in this game. There's tons of different weapons, rarities, abilities. That's really great. Like, I will say that, sure, maybe there's not as much variety in these skill trees as you would hope. And for the most part, it seems like the majority of the classes are all kind of built the same way with maybe one or two variations. But it is nice that there's like a ton of variety, for instance, with these abilities. Like, these are so far different from one another, and every character truly does feel like they play differently. You're going to hear me say this a lot, comparing stuff to Dead by Daylight, but it's another nice thing that is different from DBD in the sense that DBD just has basically character skins. Once you're far enough into the game, the difference between characters is just cosmetic. In this game, the difference between characters is they actually have their own separate abilities, which is really nice. And then that way, when you see someone in a match that has a certain skin, you can know right away, okay, this is this person's kit, and it's a nice thing to have. And tons of variety in weapons and the rarities among those weapons that really change the way a match goes. It's nice to, some people may not like the RNG in Evil Dead. I think it's great to have a little bit of RNG to make sure every match plays a little bit differently. Otherwise, you get into a situation where every match kind of feels the same. So it's nice that there's different weapons that all play differently and all offer different things. And then the last thing for gameplay that I want to say is great is the maps are amazingly designed, both in terms of being a love letter to the franchise and their gameplay design. Like, dude, look at Castle Kandar. Castle Kandar, you can complain about it maybe from a balance perspective or something like that, but that map is beautifully designed. Like, the castle itself, the level of detail in the actual castle is insane. And then having all these iconic locations on every map, like having the cabin on the woods map, having the windmill on Castle Kandar, like having all these iconic locations that you recognize from the films and from the series is really, really cool. And you could tell that these devs really care about the source material, and that's something that I think we have really only seen with this and Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th was a game where, whether you liked it or didn't, you could tell the devs cared about Friday the 13th as a franchise and really paid attention to the details. You could tell that the devs of this game care and really pay attention to the details. And that really comes out with the maps. And the nice thing, too, about those maps is that with the way they're designed from a gameplay perspective, the actual locations offer different things. So, like, for instance, on one of the woods maps that if you're on like the Flight 666 Greenwich Village area, you got to be careful up there because there's nothing really up there. It's a dangerous location for survivors. So you really should only be going up there if you're just looting very quickly, or if because the objective forces you to go there. Otherwise, you kind of want to avoid that area. On the flip side of that, the manor towards the center of the map is a great place to go because there's lots of windows, there's decent loot. Same goes for like Terminal Station down south. Lots of, well, not lots of windows there, but lots of loot. So it's an ideal location to go to. So there's all these different places that make you think like, okay, is it worth going here? Is it not worth going here? And that makes each match flow differently as well. So I love the map design in this game. As devs, we talked about how they listen to player feedback, which is awesome. Another thing that they've done really well is their ability to get all the licenses into one game at launch. That's something that Friday the 13th wasn't even able to do. Like Friday the 13th didn't pull that off. They didn't have every movie in the franchise at launch, and even at the end of at the end of that game, they didn't have every franchise in the game. They almost got Jason X in there, and they never wound up getting Freddy versus Jason in there. They never got the remake in there. So they didn't have everything in there from the very beginning. They had to add some stuff after, and they never actually did wind up getting every variation of Jason in the game. This game has everything. It had the only thing it didn't have at launch was the 2013 remake, and they added that shortly afterwards. So as of right now, until Evil Dead Rise comes out, this has everything in the franchise in it, or at least it has some sort of representation from everything in the franchise. It doesn't have every character in the history of the franchise, but it has some sort of representation from every single entry in the franchise, which is really hard to do. It is really hard, I'm sure, to get those rights all into one game. Like, even look at Dead by Daylight. They have Freddy in their game, right? But they have remake Freddy. Now, I kind of liked the remake. I thought Jackie Earle Haley playing Freddy Krueger did a great job. But I'd say 99% of people prefer the Robert Englund version. They haven't been able to get the rights to the Robert Englund version, even to this day. So they couldn't even get the rights to both versions of one character. Whereas in this game, they got the rights from what wound up being, 4 different rights holders. They got the rights to Evil Dead 1, to Evil Dead 2, to Army of Darkness, Ash vs. Evil Dead, so 5. And then they got the rights to Evil Dead 2013. So that's really impressive. And I imagine that is a pain in the butt to get that done as a dev team. And the fact that they had everything except Evil Dead 2013 at launch is insane. And something tells me that they're probably still struggling even now to work with those rights holders. I imagine that's probably why we haven't seen any Ash vs. Evil Dead content yet, because I believe that's owned by Stars. So the fact that they were able to pull this off at all is amazing. So I commend them for that. Despite my complaints is what I wrote here. The balancing and bug fixing is fantastic compared to other asymmetrical games. Balancing is really hard because of how split this game is, and you cannot just listen to data. So that's kind of what I talked about in the intro. And that's kind of all encompassing, like not just listening to the community and then balancing and stuff like that. Let's be honest, they've released a lot of patches as far as balancing and stuff goes. And yes, do we probably get too wild of swings on these balancing patches? Yeah, we do. Like, you know, we'll get a patch that, you know, wildly swings it to demon side, and then we'll get a patch that'll swing it back to survivor side and then swing it back to demon side, and so on and so forth. But regardless of how you feel about those patches, there's no denying that they do release quite a few of them. So I really commend them for that, because I can't tell you how annoying it was to play Dead by Daylight. And this might shock you as someone who doesn't really play Demon in this game. I was primarily a killer main to start out in Dead by Daylight. And it was very annoying that back then, there was infinites on every map, and if the demons in this game had to deal with the killers of Dead by Daylight had to deal with when that game first came out, they'd lose their minds. And it took forever to get those things fixed. It was literally like, imagine if Evil Dead had something where a given survivor in a match could make themselves invincible for the whole match. They just had to go somewhere and do this thing, and then the demon couldn't kill them at all, and they could win the match that way. You'd be pretty annoyed, right? Now imagine that that was in the game, and then the devs of this game didn't fix that for months. Well, then you'd probably quit. And luckily we haven't had anything like that in this game. The devs are pretty quick at patching things, especially bug fixing and things like that. And so then the last thing I want to say, and this is more of a personal thing, is that they do support smaller creators that continue to play their game. That's something most companies don't do, and no company has done that for me personally since Friday the 13th. And it's not just me, it's other creators too, because I don't even know what's going on with Saber. I don't know if I'm ever going to be invited back to participate in any of their streams. And even if I'm not, I think it's fantastic that they ever invited me at all, because the only other game I've ever played, like I said, that has invited smaller content creators to test out their stuff is Friday the 13th. And that's not necessarily like, I don't blame other devs for that necessarily. Like, I get it. It's a numbers game. You want to invite huge streamers because it gets your game out there to a bigger audience. But I do think it is important to invite, or rather reward people, I guess, for supporting your game. Like, if all you do is you pay these creators or invite these creators who are huge, who come in, play your game and introduce the new content, and then they piss off and don't play your game at all ever again until the next time content releases, it looks bad for your game. I don't know how like helpful that really is to ultimately spread it to an audience that knows, okay, well, this, my favorite streamer is playing Evil Dead the game for this one day. Can't wait for him to get off it and go back to the other game that I want to watch them play. But it's just a nice thing to do, to support smaller creators. Not many companies do it, and Saber has done it. And so even if I never get invited back to anything, and they only ever invite other content creators, that's awesome that they do that. That's awesome that they do that for other content creators that are smaller, that support their game and make content on it constantly. That's something that should be praised. Even if you think my content sucks, if you watch someone else out there whose content you do like, chances are they probably have been invited by Saber to some of these events and to check out some of this new content. And that's really, really cool. So I really appreciate Saber for doing that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. These are all the things that Saber does right, in my opinion. And I felt it necessary to make this video just to reiterate, because I didn't want to come across as too negative. And also, it felt like the right time with the Prestige system coming out and the quick patch after that to kind of lessen the grind. So here's all the things Saber does right. This is not meant to, maybe you're somebody who's really mad right now, okay? Let's say you're somebody who's about to enter my comment section, and if you are, you're probably not going to make it this far in the video, but I'm going to say this anyway in hopes that maybe I could even stop one person. It's not meant to be, me sucking up. And if you're somebody who's really mad right now because you don't like this grind, or maybe you think the game's unbalanced, I would suggest to not necessarily use the comment section as a means to vent and be like, you're wrong, Sledge. This game sucks. So these devs are evil. Maybe just name one thing that you like about the game that you think the devs have done well. Because it doesn't have to be all negativity all the time. But thank you for watching this video. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. I apologize for having like a few weeks go between my last video and this one. But like I said, I've been very busy with wrestling and other things. But I really appreciate you all watching my videos still. Hopefully we'll have some new content coming out here with the release of some of these other games. I'm really hoping that we see some more news on Texas Chainsaw soon, because that's definitely one I'm going to be making a lot of content on. But for now, as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And thank you for watching.